All right, so good morning. I hope everybody had a good Labor Day. Did you all enjoy your day off?
One day off. We have jobs.
Good job.
We have jobs.
Good job. You had to go to work over Labor Day?
Yeah.
Well, I think that we ought to have today off since we didn't have class yesterday. It's like every Monday is a Labor Day with regard to this class, and every Monday is a Labor Day for me because I only teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I've started a roll sheet. We need to talk about deductive arguments for a minute. We'll finish the rule book today, and then we'll move into a critical thinking project that you will have in your groups on what is justice. And the reason that we talk about deductive arguments, a lot of the arguments that we make in marketing are going to be based on those arguments by example, research that we've done in terms of solving problems and creating value and engaging our customers through this idea of value co-creation. But in ethics, a lot of the arguments are actually forms of deductive reasoning. Republic is largely a big deductive thought experiment that Socrates engages in with a series of interlocutors on a question that I will begin to ask you today, and we'll think about this in a lot of depth. If you've had my Principles of Marketing class, we talked about it and touched on it briefly in that class, but we'll really focus and drill down in here, and a lot of that argumentation will be deductive. So there are very simplistic forms of deductive arguments, and there are more complex forms you can add to the complexity of them. We'll talk about, and what you should know for the exam, obviously, are the simple forms, and then how to use those, transfer those into more and more sophisticated deductive arguments. And one of the things that these are nice for illustrating is a lot of the logical fallacies that you can engage in very simply with bad forms of deductive argumentation or logical leaps that people engage in making these kinds of arguments, and they do it all the time, and we see it again in the political marketplace, and we're coming up on the presidential debates, which is political marketing, and you should watch those, and we'll see what kinds of really bad arguments both candidates from each of the major parties will engage in. So with regard to deductive arguments and with regard to argumentation in general, we need to think about, and one of the things that I didn't talk about last time, because I wait until we get to the deductive arguments part, is to talk about differences in true and false and invalid and valid. A lot of times, and one of the things that people do, is we use terms to mean the same thing, or we use words similarly, and in logic they're not the same. So true and false are not the same thing as valid and invalid. And this is important because, as you'll see with deductive arguments, you can have, did you take the pretest?
Yeah.
Take it. Do you want to take it now, or do you want to?
I'll take it.
You want to take it after? Okay, in my next class, you have the option. You're the second one, right? That's right. So I understand.
I'll just wait.
Can you take it in my next class?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. One person can, so he's taking it now. True and false go to whether or not something has a basis in reality. Valid and invalid go to the structure of the argument that you're making. And so what you want is you want to make arguments that are validly structured and also true. And the biggest example of how you can use logic in ways that are not necessarily true are on things like high-stakes tests called the LSAT, for example, an entrance exam into law school. The LSAT is composed of nothing more than a series, for the most part. The biggest portion of the test, there's a writing sample, but the biggest portion of the test are these series of logic games that they give you. And they have no basis in reality, but they are logically structured. So the mode of putting, or the modus ponens, which is one of the simplest forms, which is if A, then B, A, therefore B. So I'll give you a very simple example. If it rains, the streets get wet. It rains. Therefore what? That is a valid structure of argumentation. If I said it today, would it be true?
Yeah.
No clouds in the sky.
You're saying if.
If I said, if it rains, the streets get wet, it's raining, therefore the streets are wet. Is that true?
Oh, no, not the second part. It's raining.
No. Is it raining out there?
No, I wish.
What are the rain chances today?
Not high.
0, I think. 0%. Which that's one of the things that people don't understand about the weather. When they say that there's a 40% chance of rain, what does that actually mean?
They're just guessing.
No, it means that 40% of the area will actually experience some amount of precipitation. That's what it means. So, is it true? No. But it's a validly structured argument. The mode of taking is another form. If it rains, the streets get wet. The streets aren't wet, therefore what? It didn't rain. And that's a validly structured form of argumentation. Now there are some deductive arguments, or some deductive fallacies that we'll look at that look a lot like these, and you'll see people making these kinds of arguments, and they don't necessarily do it well, particularly when we talk about things in the political marketplace like going to war, and whether or not we should. They're going to make some kind of deductive arguments, and they don't always do it well. You don't necessarily have to know about the hypothetical syllogism or the disjunctive syllogism. Dilemmas, you see these all the time being used. Again, a lot of times people use them poorly. And then the one that you really should think about and that you should look at is the reductio ad absurdum, which is reducing something to its absurd to make your argument. Now, a lot of times we see these being made, particularly with regard to what are called, and they're really, really poorly made, the parade of horribles type argumentation. This is also called the Pandora's box type of argumentation, or the slippery slope types of argumentation. Again, in the political marketplace, a couple of years ago, we saw this type of argument being made, and I don't think it was made very well because they engaged in A, some things that probably were not true, and B, some real leaps in logic in this form of argumentation. Where did we see this the most recently being used in politics? And it's amazing to me how fast this has changed. We saw it in the gay marriage debates. You saw people like focused on the family, James Dobson, arguing that if you allowed gay marriage to exist, what would happen? Well, the institution of marriage as a whole would crumble and fall, and civilization would just be, in one hell of a mess. Did that happen?
Probably not.
I don't think that happened at all. Why not? What's wrong with that sort of parade of horribles? It's this argument that if you start down the muddy slope, what happens before you know it? You what? Yeah, and probably not in the way you want it to get fallen, right? You might trip and fall, and before you know it, you're one big mud ball rolling down the hill that can't stop. Why is that used so frequently, not used correctly? So what's wrong with the argument that if you allow gay marriage, the institution of marriage will crumble and fall? That's a reductio ad absurdum. If we allow this, if you allow this one group to have it, the whole thing is going to end up in a moral malaise, and society itself will crumble. What's wrong with that argument? What?
Nobody knows that.
Nobody knows that? We've had gay marriage now for, what, about a year and a half in all 50 states. Before that, we had it in a number of states that had legalized it, either through judicial fiat or through actual legislative intent. How is one person's marriage going to destroy yours?
Shouldn't in any way.
Shouldn't. You had James Dobson arguing that if you allowed gays to marry, that the next thing you know, people would just be turning gay. It's like the South Park episode where everybody turns gay to stop the, what is it, people from the future from coming in and stealing of their jobs. It's a really bad form of deductive argument, and so you have to think about these kinds of things. So the reductio ad absurdum, it can be structured in a logical way, but you have to be very, very careful with these not to slip into logical fallacies that create problems. So composing your essays, what you want to do, and this is the point at which I give you a wonderful method for analyzing the situation. So what will happen, one of the things that you're going to do is you're going to do these article reviews, and you should use logic and critical thinking to make an argument in those. And I want you to make an argument. I don't want you to dance around an argument or tell me what argument you might make. I want you to actually make an argument and use substantive examples from the article to support your argument. Now you may argue that everything that the author says is absolutely correct, and that's fine. Students oftentimes think when I say you need to make an argument about your articles or for your group projects that I want you to refute what the author says. You can absolutely say this is the most brilliant author on the planet and we should accept his findings with regard to this topic unequivocally, and that's absolutely fine. That's an argument. But what you need to do is you need to go through and analyze these, and what will happen on the exams, it won't be an article review over a substantive topic, but rather it will be a fact pattern that you have to analyze and then figure out what the solution is using some form of logic and a valid ethical theory, and we'll talk about the valid ethical theories and what makes them valid as we progress. But the method that I want you to think about as you're going through and composing argumentative essays for your group project, your article reviews, and then ultimately for your 2 exams in which you'll have a fact pattern essay is called the IRAC method, which stands for issue. So as you analyze the fact patterns or as you go through these articles that you're going to look at, I want you to identify all of the issues that are present in the fact pattern. You're going to choose an ethical theory for your framework, and you may use a moral minimum. So what are the rules? And each of these ethical theories will have principles or rules that go with them. So what are the rules that apply to this situation? So for example, if you're analyzing something from a utilitarian perspective, the utilitarian's major premise is that you should always act in a way so as to produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. That's going to be your major rule. So as you think about these situations in the fact pattern, what is going to produce the greatest overall happiness for the most number of people, as an example?
Take a utilitarian approach.
I don't want you to take a
Okay.
utilitarian approach necessarily. I will tell you, one of the things that I think that you should be honest and upfront about is it's impossible to be value neutral. I know if you go over to the College of Math and Science, they will tell you that we have to be value neutral and that we're engaging in pure science. But if you choose to study something over something else, that in and of itself is a value judgment. If I choose to be a marketer instead of a biologist, I'm obviously making a value judgment about what is most important to me. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to tell students what your bias is, and I will tell you that mine is that I am not a utilitarian. I tend to be a Kantian duty ethicist, a rational absolutist in my own perspective. But that does not mean that I will not, accept, if you choose to use a utilitarian perspective, that as a valid argument for your papers or for your essays. Oftentimes students say, you just didn't like my paper because I didn't choose consonant. No, I didn't like your paper because you filled it with fluff and BS and vapid generalities. Like, you know, I approached the problem maker as a squirrel in an oak forest with wham bam. Don't do that. Like, you know, go engage in creative writing if that's what you want to do. So the rules, we'll talk about how Kant comes up with the rules, what a moral minimum might look like. So the issue, the rules, then you're going to apply the application of the rule to the facts that you have identified as being relevant. So when you think about things, and you think about what's going on, even very simple fact patterns often have multiple issues. If, for example, I am focused on a recession and a downturn and the having to lay people off from a company, that seems like a fairly straightforward proposition, but is it? How do you determine who you're going to lay off?
Get the dudes from Office Space, bring them in.
Okay.
What are they called?
Historically, what have we done?
The Eds?
Bob's.
The Bobs, there it is.
Bobs.
Thank you for helping me.
Historically, how have we determined how we're going to lay people off?
Man, whoever's not important. Whatever we can do without.
Yeah, last hired, first fired. Is that really a good way?
No, lowest performers, kick them out. Do the
Low-
Jack Welch.
Lowest performers. Dude, Donald Trump and the Apprentice, which, by the way, that's a miserable way of organizing a company. This idea that you pit executives against each other and use it as a zero-sum game is, I mean, it's a horrible management style. It's a nice television show because it creates a lot of drama, but it's not necessarily the way that you really want to organize. So the issue, the rule, apply, and then conclusion. Reaching your conclusion. So again, there's a way academics write. How is that? You start out with a thesis statement. You offer substantive examples in support of that thesis statement and then come to a conclusion. This helps you organize what those substantive issues are going to be. What are the issues that are involved? So for example, if you take an article about the newest release of the latest Apple product, which what's happening with Apple, they're going to release the iPhone 7. There's all kinds of issues that go along with that that you could analyze. What are some of the issues that go along with releasing the iPhone 7? Should they release a new iPhone 7? Is the 6 radically different from the 5?
According to Drake, yes.
Really? In terms of product, it's really not, it's not what we would call a completely novel or new disruption of technology. When we talk about marketing, we oftentimes talk about that environmental scan. And environmental scanning involves things like what? The technological, the economic realm. That's one thing that you can think of when you read your article reviews. How is this influenced by the environmental scan of the technology, the social, the demographics, things like that? Is this really going to be radically new? What's going to be on the new iPhone 7? What are they supposed to be coming up with? It's supposed to be radically new. I think it's going to be a better resolution on the screen, and maybe the Bluetooth headphones. They increase the ability of it to read your thumbprint more easily. How many of you have fingerprint technology on your phone? How many of you use it? Does it work well? It works about 50% of the time for me. I have sweaty little hands for some reason, and if my hands are sweaty, it fails to read it if they're at all damp. And so, you know, it's not going to be a radical. So should we actually then release products like that? Because what is Apple doing by releasing the iPhone 7? What are they doing?
Creating hype. for the product?
It's called planned obsolescence. It makes this one what?
Obsolete.
Yeah, it's cannibalization of your own product line. Is that a good thing?
I mean, for the,
We want the next big thing, so we want the newer version, so.
the thing about Apple oils is they'll always buy apples, so if their old apple's obsolete, they're gonna buy other apples, so for them it looks
Yeah,
like
but how long is it gonna take before the 6 is obsolete? There are people who are still out there using the what?
Three.
The 4,
I'm
Well,
not,
it
no, I'm
slows
not
down
yesterday,
over
I got
time.
3
a 3.
yesterday. Yeah.
My dad got me 3.
My,
I had a 4 not that long ago.
my aunt is still using the 4.
Oh, that's fact.
But those aren't typically
I can't
their,
help in this conversation.
who they're making the product for. I mean, they, of course, they're happy that an older person decided to use an Apple, but they're not really like marketing to them per se.
Do you think they're marketing to the innovators? Is that what you think?
I think they're using the ideology that it's cool to have an Apple to sell their product, and I think it goes more with the younger crowd.
There are ethicists who argue that what Apple does is creating something called affluenza, where we see products and we want them, and it may be an irrational want or desire. That rather than really satisfying needs and wants, what marketers are actually doing is creating irrational wants and desires, because it's not really that radically different. When the iPhone 5 came out, I can't remember which comedian it was, took the 4 out on the street, was like giving it to people, saying, here's Apple's new iPhone 5, it's just been released. And consumers were saying, oh my God, this is so much better. And they may have had a 4 in their pocket. And he basically pulled this over, you know, they were talking about how much better the screen was, and oh, it's so much faster. And it's because they thought it was. It's sort of kind of like a placebo effect. It's not necessarily all that much better. So there are lots of issues that we can think about in terms of just the release of a single product, a new product extension of a line, a new updated version. Should we really be doing that, or are we creating irrational wants and needs? So think about these things. You should explore all sides of the issue, all of the impact. Think about this not only in terms of macro or micro level analysis, but sort of the combination of both. The macro, is this got long-ranging consequences for not just the individuals that are going to buy the iPhone, but also society as a whole? What happens when they release a whole new product extension for Apple? Well, what happens to these products? What do we do with them?
Put it in the drawer.
Put it in the
SIM
drawer,
card in case you
and
drop it in
eventually we probably throw it into the garbage if it's old enough, and it goes into a landfill somewhere, and are we creating a whole lot of waste? There's a whole lot of stuff in this that should not be just disposed of in the garbage in the environment. Although, if you're smart, these are selling, the iPhone 6, by the way, on eBay. You can sell these for like $200, even with cracked screens. It's amazing how much they're going to. So explore all sides of the issue. Define and then revise and rethink your essay. Consider objections and alternatives. That's important. That's a fallacy to not think about it. You should follow an outline. Outline what it is you're going to do. Come up with, as you're doing the exams, a brief outline of what you think the major points are. That way you're not just going off. It really does help. One of the things that they teach you to do is outline in law school, and you learn that very, very quickly. You have something like, in Oklahoma, we have the longest day of essays of any state bar. We have 16 essays in 8 hours. And so, what does that mean for your time? If you have 16 essays in 8 hours,
30 minutes an essay.
you have 30 minutes an essay. If you're not outlining, you're probably, if you've got a time restriction. So in this class, I let you take the essays home, but if you're doing an in-class essay, think about, how much time you actually have. It's amazing how you have 2 hours for finals, and you think that's just an astronomical amount of time, and it can really get away from you pretty quickly. So outlining is always a good thing to do. The fallacies. The first, and they're related, is drawing conclusions from too little information. And closely related to that, the second greatest fallacy is overlooking alternatives. So a lot of times we draw conclusions from too little information. We assume because of mere causation and time that things cause. You know, you see something happen, you see X, and then it's followed by Y, and so you assume that X causes Y. And we talked about this last time in terms of things that may be correlated that are not necessarily causal. And I gave you the example of what? In terms of correlation, but not necessarily causation. What was the number one predictor of whether or not families engage in family planning and have fewer children in India?
Affluence.
Was it affluence? It was the number of electronic devices they had in their home. It was a very good predictor. So technology doesn't cause, you know, birth control, but it is a correlation there. And so overlooking alternatives and drawing conclusions from too little evidence. The ad hominem, this is attacking the person rather than their argument, and you see this done again. In the political marketplace, you're going to see this done all the time. Mr. Trump is probably the poster child. When it says ad hominem attack, you should just see Donald Trump. What did he do to win the Republican primary? He labeled all of his, rather than dealing with his opponent's charges, which were, you don't have a policy, you don't have a platform, you don't have a program. What did he do? He resorted to things like Little Marco, Lion Ted, low energy Jeb, and now it's Crooked Hillary. He even went out of his way to attack somebody who he knew was not even going to run against him. Bernie Sanders. Everybody knew Bernie Sanders was not going to be the Democratic nominee for president, didn't we? You thought he might actually be the... He wasn't a Democrat!
No, I meant
Until
like,
5 minutes before he decided he was going to run for president. He wasn't even a Democrat. Do you honestly think that people are going to vote for somebody who wasn't even a Democrat? Although, I guess I shouldn't say that, because until 5 minutes before he decided to run for president, Donald Trump was a what? He was a Democrat. Until 5 minutes before he decided he wanted to run for president, he started attacking Barack Obama and the birther issue and switched parties from Democrat to Republican. It's amazing. There's another billionaire who's switched parties kind of frequently. Who would that be? But he seems to be more consistent. Michael Bloomberg. He started out as a Democrat, and then he thought if he was going to win at the time, because everybody was focused on security, the mayoral race in New York, he thought he needed to be a Republican because he thought he was becoming more conservative, so he switched to the Republican Party. And what is he now? Halfway through his term, he decided he wasn't a Republican, and he switched to being an independent. So he's had 3 party switches as well. But that idea, Little Marco, Lion Ted, Crooked Hillary, that doesn't deal with whether or not Hillary Clinton's policies are any good, or whether or not building a wall is any good. It's, you know, it's just it's an ad hominem attack. Ad ignorantum is an appeal to ignorance, arguing that the claim is true because you can't prove it false. And so you'll find people, you know, well, there's no evidence to support the opposite, so it must be true. Ad misericordiam, this is the one that you'll do at the end of the semester. I have every semester students that do this. I had one a couple of years ago that told me that she relied on her student financial aid to support her and pay her bills. She was taking out the private loans that you can get, the non-subsidized loans that you can get for paying for college, for living expenses, and by failing my class, they were gonna cut off the electricity on Monday and her gas on Tuesday and her water on Wednesday, and by Thursday she'd be living in the streets. All because she was failing my class. That's an appeal to pity, or the ad misericordiam. The ad populum, everyone's doing it. And of course, you used to say this to your parents, and they would say things like what?
If everybody jumped off.
If everybody jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Well, that depends. What's under the bridge? How high is the bridge? I might jump off the bridge. In fact, bridge diving has become a big sport in the world of bungee and extreme thrill seeking. So maybe you would. Deductive fallacy of affirming the consequent. So, in the sentence, if it rains, the streets get wet. There are two parts of that sentence. There is the antecedent, if it rains, and the consequent, the streets get wet. And you can have a fallacy that looks a lot like the modus ponens or the modus tollens by either affirming the consequent or denying the antecedent, and that's an invalid structure of the form. So, if it rains, the streets get wet. The streets are wet, therefore it rained. What's wrong with that structure of the argument? The streets get wet, therefore, well, what could happen?
Sprinkler.
Yeah, the sprinkling system. How many of you have gone through Edmond and noticed in the land of the shallow and pretentious how many people are watering their yards? And it's actually watering the street, because their sprinklers have this tendency to not be. I don't know what it is when they
Our campus
install.
is really bad about that as well.
Yes, we water the sidewalks.
Yeah, the concrete.
You could have the sprinklers turned on and the streets are getting wet. The fire department could be testing the fire hydrants, which they do from time to time, and the streets would get wet. Lake Hefner Dam could break, and the streets could get wet. There are lots of things. Now, again, going back to the idea of the difference between logic and structure, and valid and invalid and true and false, the statement may be true, but the structure is not valid. So what you want is you want both a logical structure and true premises in support. Begging the question is what we call circular reasoning. Relying on your conclusion as evidence or support of your argument. An older version, I don't know if your version of the text, if you have the newer version, gives you this example, which is one that I've actually heard students make before, not so much anymore, as we've become, what's the largest denomination growing in the United States now?
Hispanics?
Denomination,
Oh, sorry.
in terms of religious preference.
Little.
The fastest growing is actually a group called the nuns. And what are the nuns? We don't mean the little women in black veils. They're people who don't identify with any denomination. That's the largest growing. Did you know that? That's the fastest growing segment. There are lots of people who now say, I believe, but I don't identify with any particular denomination. So, in the past, what was the number one, and it still is the largest denomination in Oklahoma? Yes. Yeah, and Southern Baptist was the largest denomination in Oklahoma, which was always one of the things that was interesting to me when our congressman like Ernest Istook would say, we need to have an amendment for prayer in school. Ernie was a Mormon. Do you think we're going to be saying Mormon prayers in Oklahoma? Yeah, no, we're not. We're going to be saying what? Baptist prayers in school in Oklahoma, if you're basing it on that. I always thought that was bad. It's like, you think we're going to pray your prayer, Ernie? No, it's not going to happen. Maybe you ought to think about that. God exists because it says so in the Bible, which is true because God wrote it after all. I've actually had students tell me, God wrote, no, he didn't sit down at the cosmic word processor, pound out the Bible and hand it to Moses on Mount Sinai. That's not the way it works. That's not. The Bible is the Word of God through the words of man speaking in the idiom of study. It's divinely inspired, but God didn't write it. He didn't sit down. So, begging the question, don't do that. Loaded language, also called poisoning the well. No sensitive person thinks that. That's a logical fallacy. You should know for the exam, for the final, the post hoc, ergo prompter hoc, that's assuming causation too readily on the basis of time. We've talked about that. Red herring, introducing irrelevant material. You see people doing this one all the time. If I'm speeding out here on 2nd Street and the police officer pulls me over, and I say, the car in front of me was going, even faster, is that a valid defense to the charge of speeding? No, it's irrelevant. All that matters is what?
You got caught.
Yeah, what you were doing. It's not at all relevant to the charge. All right. So any questions about logic and critical thinking? One other before I forget. Weasel wording, that's switching the meaning of a word in the middle of your argument so that it fits your argumentation. That makes it sound like your argument is valid, but it's not. The classic example of this is men and women are not physically equal, therefore the law shouldn't pretend that they are. What's the weasel wording? Or it's also called equivocation there. What word are we equivocating on? The meaning of which word?
Equal.
Equality. Is equality before the law the same thing as equality of strength?
Absolutely not.
No, it's not. It's not the same thing. It's true, if you take two people that are sort of a similar body type, one male, one female, and you send them off to the gym, who's going to build muscle mass faster? The male. Who's going to lose weight faster? The male. Does that have anything to do with equality before the law? What is equality before the law?
Being seen as humans, not as an individual sex or whatnot.
Yeah, it's not having arbitrary and capricious distinctions being made on the basis of some characteristic which is irrelevant. Sure, nobody is truly equal. There's no such thing as perfect equality between any two individuals. Each individual is made up of unique strengths and characteristics and weaknesses as well. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about equality of opportunity. It means that you should what? In this classroom, for example, what does it mean? I don't judge the essays that you write on the basis of your gender, because that has nothing to do with whether or not you write the essay well. It's not based on arbitrary and capricious. Now, that's not to say that you don't discriminate. We do discriminate all the time, and in this class, I will discriminate. Giving out grades is discrimination, but it's that you discriminate on the appropriate basis, which is what? Performance. So, weasel wording, things like that, avoid that. Any questions on arguments? Okay, so I want to give you about 20 minutes to get in your groups and answer the following questions, which I will create a Dropbox for you to submit to for your groups. What is justice? And what does it have to do with marketing?
It's gonna be like 3 pages long. Too many people. Take the whole first page, get on in.
All right, so get in your groups, answer that question. I will create a Dropbox. turn the camera off for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, so you all should have your answer. We'll start, since I started on the north side of the classroom last time, we'll start on the south side of the classroom this time. So what did you all come up with?
As far as the definition, we said the quality of being fair or just in terms of equality for everyone. We should get or receive fair treatment regardless of gender, race, etc. And then as far as our position on what is justice have to do with marketing, we kind of talked about advertising fairly to customers. And we gave 3 examples. The first one is how tobacco leads to cancer and possibly death. Therefore, it's not just or even allowed to be advertised anymore.
Okay.
The second one, we went back to what you were saying in class about the Bayer aspirin article. In hospitals, is it justified for Tylenol to say that they are the #1 recommended brand of pain relievers just because doctors in hospitals, that are getting the medication for free say so?
Uh-huh.
And then the third one, we talked about like car advertisements on TV where they emphasize the sales pitch, and then at the very end of the commercial, they give you the catch in small print, or they say it really fast at the very end where you can barely hear what they're saying.
Okay. So disclosure. So you said fairness. What else did you say with regard to that?
As far as our examples,
Fair. No, with sort of the definition you said fair.
Yeah, fair treatment regardless of gender, race, etc. The quality of being fair or just was our definition.
Okay, that's circular reasoning. I asked you to define justice.
In terms of equality for everyone.
And we've just engaged in, justice is justice. Okay, that's a tautology. Fair treatment, what else did you say?
That's the same thing.
Non-arbitrary.
We basically said the same thing in 3 different ways.
Yep, heard it.
Fairness, okay. With regard to justice, you said it's fairness. What's fairness? You see how difficult this is? We think we know what we know. Donald Trump said, right, remember when he said, I will support the Republican nominee if I am treated fairly. And people said, what do you mean by fairly? He said, you know what I mean by fairly. We all know what fair. I think we all think that we know what we mean by fairness. It's sort of like a gut check. But do we really know what or is fair just as abstract as justice itself?
It's really abstract, but mainly because you only look at what's fair for you more than what's fair for the whole. Everybody kind of looks out for themselves. It's just
Okay, it can't be an individualistic position.
Like relative.
Huh?
It's just really relative, like what's fair, okay, well what's fair for you or for me, it could be different.
Right. Okay. So it could be that there's some amount or lack of objectivity that we think that we have. I think that's going to be interesting when we talk about whether or not there are sort of absolutes that we can come up with. If I have a bag of cookies that I bring to class, you all, when you were little kids, they would say if you're going to bring something, you have to have enough for unless it was your lunch or whatever. If you brought cookies for class, you couldn't just bring it for the cool kids. Could you?
No.
Or your friends, you had to bring it for everyone. So let's suppose I bring cookies to class. How should I distribute them fairly?
Everyone gets one?
First come, first.
Wow.
Close your eyes. Close your eyes.
Yeah, for business students who've become awfully communistic,
everybody.
What are they talking about?
haven't you become pretty?
Highest performers get first choice.
The highest performers get first choice in the cookies.
Yeah, last get the oatmeal.
But yeah, first come, first serve.
The worst get the oatmeal. How many of you hate oatmeal raisin cookies? Oh my gosh, you guys are smart.
They disguise themselves as chocolate chip. How can you like them?
They look totally different, yeah.
Okay, so we could have, in terms of fairness, we could have what you suggested, the communist solution, which is equality of results, and you think that's fair. If I gave everybody a cookie, that's what you were taught in school, wasn't it? Yeah, you have to bring enough for everybody. Okay, let's use an analogy to grades. I'll treat you all fairly. Everyone gets an F.
I'm like terrible idea.
So we all get oatmeal raisin.
Yes, you'll all get oatmeal raisin cookies. That's a terrible idea? Who said that was a terrible idea? Why do you think that's a terrible idea?
F?
You don't want an F? But that's fair.
I mean, if I put in the work, definitely not to get an F, I'd be really upset.
But I'm treating you fairly. You just said you all like the communist solution, which is
I didn't
The
say that.
problem with the communist solution is that it doesn't give you the drive to be successful or to be more than you are at the current moment, because if everyone's treated fairly, it doesn't matter if I'm a doctor or a worker at McDonald's, I'm gonna get paid the same.
well, that's fair, isn't it?
Absolutely not. Somebody
Should
else-
doctors really be paid as much as they are?
Spend 20 years working up and going through their, whatever that process is called, to become like a legit certified on their own doctor, so absolutely not. It takes 2 days to learn how to work at McDonald's.
Oh, so there's some effort that
I
we have
used to work as a busboy at Boulevard Steakhouse, and all the busboys got paid the exact same with tips. And there were sometimes where I'd work so much harder than the rest, and they would just get paid the same, just sitting around. So there was just at some point I was like, well, I'm not gonna put as much effort in if they're gonna get paid the same, so why should I?
So we can see that there's a distribution problem already if you do this fairness in terms of results. And you all didn't like the everybody gets F. What about I give everybody A's?
It's still not fair, because then you don't distinguish those who are actually trying and those who are just riding the coattail.
Keep your participation trophy.
Or
Okay. All right. Okay, well, we're off to a good start. I'm out of time, so we'll have to finish this next time. But you can see that this is not really as easy as we think it is, maybe.